Hey, deserving listeners, 90-Day Fiancé, The Last Resort. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Keep in mind with all my content, since this is a psychology channel, there might be triggering material. I usually try to warn people specifically if something more obviously triggering might be coming up. But, there are various different triggers, various different traumas. So, take care of yourself. Talk with your therapist before watching these kinds of things. Let's watch.
I expected to have a little hiccups, but I didn't see this one coming. Just off the start, Molly's being cold, and I'm not for that.
I'm getting a little nervous because I feel like we're going to be late for our session.
Oh, is it close?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And we're running late.
To the therapy!
Okay, so I haven't been commenting on the very typical behavior that we've seen from Angela. I don't know if they're shenanigans, but she literally said that, Michael, you better do well in therapy because everything is your fault, something like that. And she's saying that he cheated on her, and I think he admitted to that, but you could argue she cheated on him as well. Two wrongs don't make a right, but I think this relationship has a lot of things to talk about, including the infidelity, but given the edit, I would say she has a lot more self-reflection that would be necessary for the relationship to be a fair one. Anyway, so I'm not really commenting on that because it's just the same old, same old. But I didn't realize, so they're all meeting up and drinking, and now they're going to therapy. I think it was even encouraged that it wasn't a mistake, I think, that they were drinking. I'm quite sure that there's not a lot of retreats for couples that would encourage people to get intoxicated, especially when you don't know how much they're going to drink. I mean, maybe if you had one drink, but even that would be potentially frowned upon at the very least, and could be problematic to the therapy. There's a lot of talk in my field, especially in the past, but I think still, around intoxicated clients. Like, people will say, they'll have this really hard line that if a client comes to session high, for example, on marijuana, then it's unethical to treat the client, and that's just not true. Or it's not unethical. I'll say that, but they'll also say that it's useless to try to help someone in therapy because they're intoxicated and no therapy is going to work on them. And there's no evidence that that's scientifically proven or anything. The other thing I'll say is that, there's a lot of psychotropics that people will take that are prescribed, maybe an ADHD medication, a stimulant, for example. Well, would you say that they shouldn't be taking that when they're in therapy? Some people would say having your ADHD medication is critical to being able to concentrate in therapy, that kind of thing. People will say, well, what if they're intoxicated on caffeine? Caffeine can affect things, can affect your mood, your energy level, that kind of thing. Would you refuse treatment to someone that was currently high on caffeine? Now, alcohol and marijuana are perhaps more affecting than caffeine, of course, but this hard line about this. So I'm not saying that it'll be useless. You could argue that maybe for some clients it could take the edge off in the first session. I don't know. But I certainly this wouldn't be my choice, let's just say, if I were in charge of the retreat. Certainly if you want to have an adult beverage after, then go for it. But even then, I might even say, let's maybe try to lay off on that kind of stuff, because that, one, might make it hard for you to concentrate the next day. And given the amount of unearthing that can happen during these processes, when you're drinking, it can complicate things. You can, in a state of distress and hurt and confusion, if you're drinking, one, it's just not a good way to cope with your emotions, but two, you might be prone to taking impulses or acting on impulses that you wouldn't have otherwise given your emotional state going into it. But anyway, so now they're going to therapy and they've all been drinking.
Welcome, welcome. Please have a seat.
I have been doing therapy with couples for 40 years.
Okay, so P.T. Silvera. Let's look up this clinician's credentials. I'm curious. Okay, so I'm looking at her Psychology Today profile, It says that she's a marriage and family therapist. She has a master's in education, and she is a licensed marriage and family therapist. I am only barely aware of how master's in education applies to being a licensed clinician in marriage and family therapy. I know of others that have had it, but I think it's something of the past. But it's possible that she was grandfathered in, or grandmothered in, if you will, given the past requirements for certification or licensure. I don't know. That's neither here nor there, really. It's just a detail. And reading her, she constructs this bio. As a marriage and family therapist, spiritual teacher, and past life regression expert on TLC 90 Day The Last Resort that premieres August 14th, 9 o'clock, 8 Central. I also help clients, and there's a comma there instead of a period. I also help clients resolve issues of mind, body, and spirit to create lasting transformation. I will show you how to access healing at a soul level. Trained with Dr. Brian Weiss in 1991, I unlock negative cell memories using past life and between lives regression. Oh boy. Okay. Well, I'll reserve judgment, but I'll reserve judgment. Proof's in the pudding. We'll see how it plays out.
And I know there can be healing in relationships. And I think my colleagues absolutely would agree that miracles can happen.
Am I supposed to sit over there? You have to sit by your...
So it depends on what you mean by miracles. If you're just saying metaphorically, can very wonderful things happen in therapy, things that seem impossible? Yeah, but do literal miracles happen where there's divine intervention? That's a religious belief. It's not shared by many, and it certainly isn't a scientific statement. But, again, I'll reserve judgment.
Hello, Michael. Even though it's 2 a.m. over there, that's really difficult for Michael. I give him props where needed.
I'm staying up late in the name of love, to revive my marriage and to save it.
This is our last shot.
Well, welcome to your...
Okay, so Dr. Janie Lacey, let's look up their credentials. I'm just going to take a guess and say that it's more standard, at least I hope. Okay, so Dr. Janie Lacey is a licensed mental health counselor in Florida, I believe, and also a certified sex addiction therapist, and I believe has a doctorate similar to mine, a psychology doctorate, and that's why she calls herself a doctor. And she also talks about how she works on relationship trauma. That's not a standard term. I use the term relational trauma, but it's kind of a niche phrase. So when I see someone else using it, I'm not exactly sure what she means by it, but I can imagine what she means by it. But anyway, she seems like she has a more standard background.
Couples retreat.
We need you guys to open up your hearts to each other, open up your eyes to the issues, but most importantly, open up your ears and listen. My name is Dr. Jason Prendergast. I'm your certified temperament therapist.
Certified temperament therapist. Were all the marriage and family therapists busy or something? Okay, so what was his name again?
You guys to open up your hearts to each other, open up your eyes to the issues, but most importantly, open up your ears and listen. My name is Dr. Jason Prendergast.
Okay, so Dr. Jason Pendergast has a doctorate in pastoral psychology, and that can be a legit educational path for what I would observe to be legitimate counseling. I've worked with pastoral folks before, but it could be, I don't know, it's less standardized in my anecdotal experience. I'll just put it that way. Now, many people are looking for pastoral counselors, so there's nothing wrong with that. But I've seen a wide variety, but I've seen a wide variety of all therapists, regardless of background. So there's that. Looking at one of his bios, Dr. Jason has extensive experience with those seeking help with depression, trauma, anxiety, bipolar disorder, stress management, low self-esteem, life transitions, and relationship issues. I will work to tailor your therapy based on your situation. That's good. My goal is to help you feel understood, bring balance and harmony to mind, body, and spirit, and focus on a strength space. Now, I wonder if the folks on the show are actually looking for spiritual-based counseling. Certainly, there's a lot of legitimacy to it, and for many clients, that's how they frame their lives. In fact, I'm often encouraging my trainees to think about it more and ask questions more of their clients regarding their religious, spiritual life, because a lot can reside within that, and clients might feel shy to bring that up because they feel like it's not something you're supposed to talk about in therapy, where, of course, clients should be able to talk about whatever they want to. But there's a lot of stigma around religious people, particularly in spaces like therapy. So, I could see the cast members wanting this sort of thing. I think Angela is religious. I'm not sure. They often will whitewash that on this show, the way in other shows like Married at First Sight, they won't whitewash their religious background. But on this show, they whitewash religion, they whitewash political beliefs, and other kind of subculture things, because I think they want to make it more appealing and universal to every American or everyone on the planet. But, it's hard to find an American that doesn't have some political beliefs about things. And we could imagine what Angela's are. And then also, I'm guessing that Kalani and Asuelu have some, beliefs in that area. I don't want to stereotype, but I'm guessing that Jovi and Yara probably do as well. I don't know. But so maybe this is exactly the sort of therapy that they're looking for. Temperament therapist. I've literally never heard. I'm going to Google that. Oh, I thought that temperament therapist was a therapist that helps you with your temperament, with your, I don't know, maybe your mood, your emotions, this sort of thing. But according to temperament therapy, it's a part of the National Christian Counselors Association, or at least that's one of the sites that we're seeing. And according to Google, who knows if it's accurate, but here's one result. Temperament therapy is based on helping you discover what your God-given temperament really is and exploring ways that you can change your life to develop your innate strengths and smooth off the rough edges. I'd be really curious if the cast members are looking for this kind of therapy. And if not, I would be really curious as to what was going through the production team's mind because I'm going to take a guess and say that because I believe they're in Florida, in the southern Florida area, if you took 100 therapists who focus on couples, 99 of them would have a more standard background, because these are, they're out there, and certainly if this is the sort of therapy you're looking for, then go for it by all means. But I'm just wondering what, not only him, but her, the other woman, they're both spiritual, very God or spiritual forward. I'm wondering if that's now, it's also possible that they offer that, but they don't start with that. If a client isn't asking for that sort of thing, they stick to the normal range of sorts of discussions of therapy. I don't know, but I'm just curious as to what was going on in their minds. The other therapist is much more in line with, I would imagine, a typical marriage and family therapist. But even her description, let me just pull up like a really typical description just to give you an idea. That doesn't mean that these three clinicians are bad. It just means like, it's just odd that of all the therapists that were available to them to call, these are the three that ended up on the show. No shade. Everything's fine so far. I'm going to reserve judgment, of course. Oh, another thing about the second therapist, Dr. Janie Lacey, is on her website. It says that she has been on, it's very focusing on her media appearances on ABC, Good Morning America, CBS, CNN, Fox Soul, NBC, TED Talks. Her website is more about her podcast and her media appearances than on her clinical work, but nothing wrong with that. Okay, so I went to Psychology Today, which is the main database for therapists. Not all clinicians are on Psychology Today, like I'm not on Psychology Today, but a lot are, and the advice that you always get, and I would always give, is if you're in private practice and you're trying to build a practice, you need to be on Psychology Today at least. You need to do other things, but that's a must because that's how a lot of people find therapists. So there's a therapist in my area, and she's a marriage and family therapist, licensed marriage and family therapist, and her bio is, as a marriage and family therapist, I have had the privilege of working with adults, couples, and children and families throughout my 15-plus year career in the mental health field. I've developed my career by gaining experience in like it's very standard. There's nothing. Now, maybe this individual has some interesting specializations, but not that I can tell. Not that having interesting specializations makes you. I'm just saying what I just described to you. And she has a master's from a university that I know about. Florida could be different. It's weird. In the United States, the therapy industry has different standards of qualifications and trends in different parts of the country. I'm very familiar with Washington and the Pacific Northwest and our trends, for example. California has its own odd system that I have become kind of aware of because we're at least close enough to California. I've heard a lot about the Northeast and New England area and how they have a very different system in terms of what sort of degrees you should get if you want to be a clinician. I don't know anything about the Southeast, but maybe it is quite different. I was under the impression that Florida was very similar to Washington State in terms of if they were similar, they weren't. I was under the impression that Florida was not similar to California or the Northeast, but more to the general practice and standards that a lot of states have, including Washington State. So I don't know, but it's just notable. I'll just say that.
We might make them quit their job.
On these next 2 weeks, you're going to learn how to deal with conflict, and we're going to learn how to rebuild trust. We're going to be using a variety of techniques like family therapy, relationship therapy,
Kama Sutra therapy, temperament therapy,
Past life regression and hypnosis.
Okay, so it sounds like the different modes or types of help are being divvied up, and from Dr. Janie, forgetting her last name, she is, and she said, in charge of family therapy. And so I'm guessing that involves Kalani's sister, maybe, I don't know, maybe the kids, because they're there, but the other folks don't have family members, or maybe they'll call in families. I don't know. Or she's just saying family therapy because it's a general term for marriage and family therapy. And then it was also mentioned Kama Sutra. Okay, you can use different methods of getting to know each other, or sexual expression, or discovering your body, or there's a lot of work that can be done there. Who knows how that'll look? I'm sure that's included because it plays well on television, but whatever. And then we hear that temperament therapy, he said, I'm going to help you with temperament counseling, which is essentially, if I remember right, it was to find find the temperament that God wants you to have. Yeah, the God planned temperament. So there's that. Now, again, if a client is looking for that, then 100%. If I've supervised Christian counselors before who came to me asking for supervision to help them with their practice, and I can absolutely help those folks. I can supervise them. I can help them work with this, because, you know, if you advertise yourself as a Christian therapist, you're going to get a particular kind of clientele. And I am very comfortable in that space. The key is the client and the therapist both want to be doing that mode of therapy and talking in that way. And there's a lot of variety within that, right? You know, you can be a Christian therapist and push your Christianity on everyone, or, you know, just pray in therapy and not actually do any, you know, standard therapy techniques in therapy. Or like the Christian counselors that I would supervise, if you watched it from the outside, you wouldn't know it was Christian counseling, because a lot of the therapy that happens within Christian therapy is the same sorts of things you would talk about in secular therapy. You know, things like trauma, things like symptoms, things like communication and emotions, getting to know each other, getting to know yourself, expression, knowing your needs, you know, all those kinds of things. And there's nothing Christian or unchristian about that. It's just human, right? So, you know, we'll see. But then we hear, what did she say? Soul. I'm going to help you with your soul. Okay. Yeah, I'll reserve judgment. There's a lot of forms of therapy and a lot of things that work. And I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking, but I don't think I even knew that they were going to have 3 clinicians. It sounds like they're the whole series. For some reason, I thought each couple would have a different therapist or something, and it wouldn't be so focused on the therapist. You know, that's usually what it's like on the show, but it's kind of like Married at First Sight, where the clinicians seem to be kind of front and center. Who knows? We'll see. But I was, I guess, in the back of my mind, hoping that we could focus on the couples and that just a regular set of things would happen in therapy, things that look very familiar to me and all the other marriage and family therapists out there. But it's starting to look like it's not going to be that. It's going to be a bunch of sensational techniques that play. Because, you know, I've always said this, that I noticed this early in my career, that in therapy, when I'd be doing therapy, or me as a client for that matter, the drama that would be happening in the therapy office, every couple minutes, like another humongous bomb of emotions was going off. And if you're in that relationship therapeutically, it's intense and it's dramatic and it's interesting and, you know, gives you life. You know, I would be driving home from work in my early career, and my head would just be spinning with all the things that had happened that day. I said, oh my God, remember that moment? Oh my God, that moment. Oh, like the ups and downs that people go through in therapy and that you go through as a clinician. You know, it's traumatic. But I also noted that if you filmed it, it would be boring as shit because you're just watching 2 people talk. And I thought, you know, that's unfortunate because, you know, some very interesting, dramatic, intense, important things are happening in therapy, but there's no way to translate that unless you're in the people's shoes. You could even be in the room and watching the therapy, and you might not really feel it because you're not the one doing the thing, you know? So many memories are often encoded based on how intense the experience is. And the recall of events in your life are often correlated with how intense the event was. You know, very mundane events like driving to work the same as you always do might not ever be recorded long-term memory, right? Whereas having intense experiences. And I can't tell you how many experiences I have as a client and as a therapist that are, you know, jumbled in my head. just thousands of moments that I could just rattle off. Okay, there was that moment, then there was that moment. You know, things that happened 25 plus years ago. So it's very intense. And I imagine that the producers either intuitively know that, and they're thinking, well, we can't just have regular therapists. We need something that looks interesting, like Kama Sutra and past life, and forcing people to talk about God or something. I don't know. We'll see. All right. Well, I want to thank you if you have subscribed to the channel. It does help us. in some ways regarding analytics, and I think sponsors might appreciate it if we have more subscribers, meaning that sponsors might only consider some channels that have a certain amount of subscribers, only if you care to. And everyone, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.